Hello everyone, Bruce Davidson here. This afternoon I'd like to present an article called Making Things Visible. It's an intriguing piece of work provided by Snyder, Voida, Adams, Halpern, Choudhury, and Geri. And you can see in the subtext here it says opportunities and tensions in visual approaches for design, research, and practice. Now really what they're talking about ultimately is that there are a number of techniques, visual techniques, that can be used with practitioners, that can be used with research to help elicit better information and feedback from our customers, from our clients, and ultimately the participants that we have in a number of our research projects. So the authors would like to work through a design process that ultimately allows and gives people their voice and ensures that things that may have been concealed are now visible. And if they're visible, we can talk about them. We can talk through them. We can see what the impacts are. We can understand them better. And that conversation will happen between practitioners and their users and researchers and their participants. And in a lot of cases, it's technology that we're going to use to try and ensure that visibility is there. Now, in terms of the approaches, the visual approaches, there are three that are highlighted in this paper. First one, sketching, not new, been around for a long, long time. But the other two are a little bit newer. The first one is photographic content analysis. Basically, it's taking pictures with smartphones. Not that pictures are new, but how we do that is different than before. And of course, the personal informatics. We have smartphones which are now able to actually capture so much more information about us, wearable technologies, for example, than we've done before. So through three different case studies, the authors take a look at the benefits and some of the negatives of each of these. So the first case study is sketching, something I'm sure all of you are familiar with, and it's a great way to work with ideation. All you need is a piece of paper and a pencil and two folks or more sitting down trying to work through ultimately a process, a set of ideas, trying to figure out what's going to happen in what flow or order. It's a very, very cheap way of prototyping ultimately because you're building it in your head and you're putting it on paper and it's malleable. You can change it. And that's the other great thing I love about it is that it's not just one way. It is a conversation that's happening. Multiple people can have inputs there. And of course, that's something that you can take away. As it mentions here, it's a reminder for further thought or a stimulus for further thought. We can talk about it, but we've got it captured so we can take it away, which is the bottom point, and then bring it back. And you don't have to have an awful lot of skill sets to do this. You don't have to have a degree in a particular area to do this. It is a matter of, can we understand what we're talking about, the context, grab that pencil and start getting in there, erasing things and moving things. And that's sketching. So in this case study, they had a particular project in mind, and they were taking a look at a farmer's market and wanting to make changes. Of course, they were wanting to also ensure that they worked with the stakeholders, the people who actually shop there, to ensure that their changes would be well adopted and they would actually get to the level of change and be able to support that change. Ultimately, at the end, they conversation, go through and have a dialogue with the community to see what their current experiences were and where they wanted to move to. Over here on the side, of course, is a sketch of what someone actually decided that the current experience was, which was not so good. This came from a focus group, and this is one of the key things that they were asked to comment on. Now, the group also wanted to, in their new design, support local sustainability, and had some ideas around that. And that was the second part, which is they were also able to show these focus groups some sketches in terms of what they wanted to do. So this is one of the sketches that they showed the group. And on post-it notes, they asked for comments. Some of them were very much in line, which is what they were hoped. Yes, absolutely, keep things orderly. Others felt, no, we're like cattle in a chute. No, 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 no. right? And that's one of the challenges, of course, with sketches, which is it is to relay an idea, but it doesn't really give you a lot of context, right? So I don't know how much of a cattle shoot this looks like. Another person described it as it feeling like you're at the airport, but the implications is that potentially it could be cold. One of the other areas is mentioned, of course, which was the local sustainability, and they had actually termed it table to farm. And what they wanted to do was get people to use their smartphones to take picture of their time there and the food that they ate. And they would then take those images and put them on LCD screens throughout the environment. Again, based on feedback, they had some unexpected pushback, in fact. One particular observer said that the LCD screens would inject into the market the very thing that she goes there to escape, the hustle and the bustle and always having to get things done, and things are bright and all over the place. It wasn't what she's there for. And we know from Wiser, one of our earlier readings, that the computer screen is a very demanding kind of technology. It demands focus. It demands your attention. So she has a point, and it certainly, from a design standpoint, was something that the farmers market needed to take back and reevaluate and say, okay, well, what will this do to the culture and the quality of the time that people would actually spend there? So that was the first case study. Again, using sketching to try and have a basis for conversation, a basis for feedback. The second case study was around photographic content. And we touched on that briefly in the previous case study. This one takes it into a slightly different arena for different purposes. So again, it's a matter that camera phones are everywhere. And in this particular study, they wanted to take advantage of what we're doing with social media, i.e. posting, as we did with the previous case study. And they do note, of course, is that there's been this rather big evolution, right? And it's changed the relationship between the research and the participants. Absolutely. I think we can see that in many of the folks around us in terms of what do we do with our own images. We're taking a lot more pictures, we're posting them, we're sharing them. We're documenting our lives in a new way. We're giving access to our lives in ways that we may not have done so. And it may be done from multiple perspectives, right? So when we start tagging our pictures and we're putting them out on things like Facebook, for example, a multitude of people can come in potentially and actually see the different shots that we're doing from different perspectives. Now, in terms of the specific project, they had something called Vera that they were working on. Now, this is a mobile app, and it was designed to help encourage better health, better wellness, and ultimately have people feel better about themselves and obtain some of those goals that they've been looking to get to, weight loss, for example. So, some focus here. And that's what the tool is for. That's what this particular tool is all about, is helping to provide focus for the users. So, what the users are supposed to do is once they've registered, they're supposed to document their decisions through the day. Food decisions is what they're to be coming up on. There's a status update. You can see them over here. So not only what did I eat or what did I not eat, and ultimately some information around my comments around this, when I did this, my name, and people can come and comment on it. So there's some very subjective kind of pieces that can come with that. But of course, in terms of this project, the researcher was actually looking for something a little bit different. One of the things that they were looking to actually track, if they could pull out, was from the photographic evidence itself. They were looking at the social influences. So they had all these participants signed in. The text wasn't providing them with that. However, they were able to actually reconstruct a lot of their lives based on the pictures that they took. So that ultimately is where their analysis was. And you can see two examples sitting over here that I can go through and say, hey, I'm eating my breakfast alone at work, or I'm out with friends eating a meal. In addition to that, of course, we could get pictures of people going to the gym. Again, were they walking alone? Were they in a group? Were they solitary? Were they doing something as a part of a family and so forth? But it's a great example ultimately of what the information can show. that there's a lot more contextual information around here that can help support ultimately the goals that the users have stated, and they may not always come forward with in a very direct manner. However, the photographic evidence can help support ultimately what they were doing. Now, the third case study actually does have some overlap with case study number 2. So let me just highlight some key things that the authors were actually looking for in this one, and then we'll get into some specifics. So again, they were looking for data, and part of that data was indeed visual, i.e. things, pictures that people could take, but they wrote an app that also captured more information that may not always be visible. And ultimately, because it ran on their smartphone, they were able to actually capture where, for example, a person was, making use of GPS technology, for example. They were going through and taking a look at things like heart rate and so forth. The key point with this, however, is that they were collecting information about people's behavior, where they were, their routines, and they were finding a way to ultimately graph and chart that information. So they actually ended up with a lot of quantitative data to go along with this. So in particular, the project was called Sesame. And as you can see in the title, it was Stress Experience Sampling and Measurement Experiment. And the point was to highlight where individuals were most stressed. And again, they were looking at an individual throughout their day. So built on a smartphone, they were able to go through and take a look and see where the individual was at. And of course, they wore an electrodermal activity device that connected to the smartphone so that they could record additional data. Right? A key piece, of course, is that this information was presented back to the user. So it wasn't just that it was being recorded, it was being recorded and the user could actually see that. They could see the maps as to where the person was. They could actually see what things were looking like. And through it all, they were able to do some interesting things. So not only could the user understand better themselves, but certainly the researchers were able to actually understand the subjects a little bit better. They actually had a fairly extensive list of where they had been, what were they experienced, were there any gaps in coverage. And that's something, of course, that they could actually then work on and see if maybe that's something that could be resolved. But the big point ultimately was that it was a big starting point for a conversation, right? They were very concrete stories ultimately that the researcher and the participant could work at. They could actually look at these charts and say, tell me what happened here. And of course, just human nature that often we forget things or we are not even unaware. I mean, if your dentist goes through and say, hey, do you grind your teeth at night? I think for a lot of us, we have to kind of go, I'm not so sure. Do we or don't we? Right? But it allows basically us to participate in a dialogue with our users and talk about ultimately what happened. So the technology is there in a supporting element, in a supporting way, but by making these things visible, by knowing when you're most stressed and ultimately when the tension points arise, it's recorded and it's a reminder, so that we can go back and we can talk about it. Not to mention, of course, that everybody treats, this question of how stressed are you differently. On a scale of 1 to 5, likely many of us will go through and give different numbers, even if we were all experiencing the same levels of stress. So HCI researchers are very much interested in studying how the human beings interact with information, with technology, business, various different contexts. The point ultimately is how do these 2 points connect or don't connect? How do they communicate or not communicate? And ultimately, that is what our authors are trying to get at, which is that there's a methodology here that would help with that gap. I'm going to go back to Hutchins because he in one of our texts earlier, spoke about the gulf of execution, right? This disconnect that users can have with the system and the system with the users. And one layer in particular, which was that was pointed out, is the semantic distance, right? Which is essentially about the language again, either between the user and the system and the system and the user, because ultimately there's not a layer of commonality. This is ultimately where a lot of those visual cues that are introduced by our authors here can assist with. Right? It's our authors that are stipulating that by using these kinds of methodologies, we can actually work to reduce the semantic disconnect or the distance that Hutchins was talking about. Now, in particular, the author, again, is talking literally about how to make things visible so we can understand that and talk about it and communicate it and work through things. From a design standpoint, our authors were also very much supported by research done earlier. It's listed here in our slide, because they also want us to be aware that our choices need to be done consciously, they need to be done ethically, they need to be socially aware, because ultimately the choices that we're making will impact our users, will impact our participants, and we must be fully aware of what the consequences of those are. While we speak in terms of a lot of the visual methodologies as being great things to break down barriers, there are some possible dark side moments that could come with this, right? So I'm pulling this from the article, is that it does help to frame a discussion of opportunities and tensions, and it's those tensions that are kind of the dark side, if you will. So what are the opportunities? From the sketching standpoint, it was the opportunity for the users to basically reflect on changes coming to the environment, and for the designers to recognize some of the key reasons why their clientele was there in the first place. And certainly the process supported that. Right? It challenged the limitations of the space, and it challenged the users to think about things in a new way, in addition to that skepticism around what the technology would actually bring to the environment. For the photographic component, certainly social context is now certainly visible rather. Who's eating with who, what are they doing, and why. So there's a key there for the research, and again a key there for the users as well. Same thing with the personal informatics. Ultimately, they can see what their health progress is like, where are the stress points, and certainly from a researcher standpoint, they've got comparable data. They've got automatic recordings and data to actually work from. So lots of wins here. In terms of tensions, well, they exist there as well. So certainly from a sketching standpoint, misrepresentations, right? Inadequate or inappropriate representations. That line may not truly represent the materials or the feeling of what's going to be there. There's still interpretations based on the client side. From the photographic, again, interpretations come in here as well. What are we sharing? Do we need to share it? Privacy issues are all over this particular area, as people tend to look more around the picture. Certainly the researchers in this case look around the pictures to try and actually put together what was happening. And again, with the personal informatics, yes, we're recording all the time, but it's very invasive. Do we record in intimate spaces? Do we record in the bedroom, in the bathroom, for example? Where would we stop? Now, of course, there are a whole host of other researchers who are actually working in this particular area. There is one, however, I would like to pull forward. Kim is a name I've listed here. That particular team and an associated paper speaks to visual analytics, and it builds on top of what Snyder, Baumer, Voida, and Adams have presented here in their case studies, which is we collect vast amounts of data. And yes, we do need to do this in a very ethical and proactive manner, a very cognizant manner. But because there's so much that comes in, there are a number of questions that happen around that data. So what is relevant, for example? And it can be quite complex in terms of how we decide that, but who decides that? How do we present that information? And is it decision-oriented or task-oriented? What does it look like? How do the users actually make use of that? Not to mention, of course, with the 3 different case studies, we've identified some key benefits and some things that are not so good, but ultimately, which of the 3, for example, is most effective? We didn't quite get there in that particular paper. In terms of future work, Certainly, the paper itself does address a couple of things. Again, the evaluation methodology, the implementation and effectiveness, especially the effectiveness, that wasn't an area of concern in that particular paper. Certainly something to delve more into. The user. What if they could control their content more specifically? And I'm thinking of the Sesame component in particular. What if they could actually redact their content? What might that look like? Not to mention, of course, what are some of the newer visualization tools that are available and might provide us with some additional context? So thank you for listening. I've got a reference slide here, which is at the very end. And again, these are some of the paper and folks that we pulled upon to put this presentation together. I look forward to hearing your comments and your questions throughout the week. Thank you.